Throughout the better half of 2019, I had person after person ask me if I had played The Lost Child and what I thought of it. And time again, I responded with, yeah, I played it years ago on Vita. It was pretty good. Of course, that wasn't right. The Lost Child was still a pretty new release, a niche little anime dungeon crawler with various inspirations pulled from Shin Megami Tensei, just localized by NIS America. Leading up to the game's release, I consistently got it confused with Child of Light, and I completely missed out on this actually coming out. However, I did end up adding it to my backlog rather late, after seeing it marked down to around $20 in an EB Games. Then, I came to you folks on Twitter asking what game to knock out of my backlog next, and this one won by a single vote. So here I am, ready to review one of the okayest games I think I ever played. If any of you ever want to help steer me in a different direction when I seek advice like this, consider giving me a follow on Twitter, but be warned, I'm about 10% video game tweets on there and about 80% movie tweets, with the rest just being random crap. So yeah, I might be spoiling my final thoughts a little bit up front here, but there's not really much point in beating around the bush with this one either. For as many things as this game does well enough, it does just as many kind of poorly. So let's start taking a look at this by looking at the story and characters first.
Do you remember the tragic battle during the war between heaven and demons? I still remember why Sis did what she did.
The whole thing begins with some foreword about time distortions, the root of all evil, some stuff about heaven and hell, angels and demons, the impending ultimate battle, and the fate of all life as we know it being entrusted to a special Chosen One type character. Of course, we meet this Chosen One as soon as the game properly starts off. This Chosen One being our main character, Hayato. Hayato is a journalist for a schlocky occult magazine called Lost. It's his job to go out investigating rumors and tall tales from around Japan and write up crappy little pieces about his findings. The first job we're sent to look into revolves around an uptick in suicides in the local subway. Suicides that seem to coincide with the appearance of a mysterious woman in purple. While in the subway, Hayato is attacked and actually saved by the mysterious woman in purple. Before vanishing, she entrusts Hayato with a mysterious locked case and a simple message to live. Upon returning to his office, Hayato has a meeting with a woman named Lua, who proceeds to tell him that she is a messenger from God, an angel sent to aid him, the Chosen One, in the upcoming battle to save humanity. And she apparently also has info on how to open the locked case. From here, Hayato kind of just goes along with her, and the story quickly begins to fall apart. Since Hayato is a silent character, it's hard to feel he has any real motivation in this story, or that anything he sees in the world around him has any actual effect on him mentally. Without much opposition at all, we just start entering dungeons, or as this game calls them, layers, where demons and fallen angels are believed to preside. It's often the tips that come in through the occult magazine that let us know where we're moving the battle to next, but it's hard to feel like any of it's amounting to anything more than simple filler. In a world so populated by angels and demons and hell, even Lovecraft monsters such as with a few Egyptian gods mixed in for good measure, you'd think we'd have more to work with, but plot development is sparse at best, seeming to not get interesting again until at least chapter 5. But even then, it's not enough to carry the story. This absolute failure to capitalize on the potential of the world and setting just stings more and more as it goes along. The Lost Child essentially has a Men in Black thing going on, where fallen angels, rather than the aliens seen in Men in Black, have lived amongst humans for generations, just blending in, with only a select few people actually aware of their existence. Aside from one or two characters you get to talk to along the way, it never feels like the world is populated by them in any organic sense. There's just a couple of them around because the plot needed them to be there. The lackluster plots, of course, needing something, anything at all, just to continue. Nobody in The Lost Child ever really seems to know why they're fighting, nor what they're protecting. They simply do what they do because the will of God or whoever has ordained it, and they're all just naive enough not to question it. This stays true until the very last chapter of the game, effectively making the whole thing come off as rather directionless. The characters in general are hit or miss, with the biggest miss definitely being Hayato. Given the world's use of Lovecraft monsters, who are said in their original source material to be so shocking and terrible in form that merely witnessing their horror is enough to send anybody into a psychological breakdown, having a silent main character that reacts to nothing was a poor way to implement them. When it comes to established myths such as the gods, the demons, and monsters, The Lost Child does little more than pay lip service to them, making a rather interesting premise flounder and lose appeal quickly. I did rather like Lua, but even then, she is not a special character. Just kind of a green, innocent girl blindly following her orders and trying to do what she believes is right, while the world around her throws what she knows into question. The boss of Lost, the aforementioned occult magazine, is also a fun character, but he doesn't get very much screen time. He just reminds me of, well, a certain boss from the Spider-Man universe.
I want Spider-Man!
Most other characters only make brief appearances as part of filler arcs, but they largely work okay. So yeah, that is essentially what The Lost Child is in a nutshell. Our main character, a piece of unbuttered toast with zero internal conflict, makes his way through dungeons and battles demons because he was told to, and he's supposed to. The end. So the game has an interesting start for sure with these themes of suicide. You think it's really gonna get into something pretty big and something pretty deep. But unfortunately, the intro is kind of the best this game really has to offer. As the story goes along, it just doesn't really support itself very well. Sadly, the battle mechanics can more or less be summed up in the exact same way. Good ideas? They don't really go very far. So let's take a look at those next. There are a lot of systems in play for The Lost Child, none of which are complicated, and most of which don't amount to much or can even be forgotten about entirely. Before we continue, I've stated this in many reviews and will do it again here, but I play all of my games for review on normal difficulty. Unless, of course, I state otherwise. I feel like that's the intended difficulty, it's what most people will play the game on, and it's what would be most useful in the context of a review. Tedium and difficulty are something I'm kind of used to from dungeon crawlers. In fact, I feel like the genre at times is almost defined by it, so I try not to play too many of them in the run of a year. Now, combat in The Lost Child is anything but tedious. However, difficulty is almost non-existent after the first chapter. For reference, I used the game's auto battle on all 4 forms of the final boss and never came close to death. The Lost Child is about the easiest dungeon crawler I've ever played. For those looking for something more akin to the normal amount of difficulty, definitely consider playing this one on hard. Now, to start off, enemies are encountered randomly while exploring dungeons. The enemy encounters can have you facing off around 10 to 12 people at once, or just a single unit. When you enter battle, you bring 5 units in with you: Hayato, Lua, and 3 Astrals. Astrals are summons in a sense, monsters that you capture in battle by using your signature weapon, an angelic gun called the Gangor. Basically, any enemy can be captured with this, and a sort of Pokemon or Shin Megami Tensei system comes into play. After capturing an Astral, in order to use them, you must first purify them by using your Karma. Karma is gathered mostly through combat, but can be gained through dialogue choices as well. The Karma comes in 3 different categories: good, evil, and dual. This isn't just used for purifying Astrals, but it can also be used to level them up, as opposed to our human characters like Hayato and Lua, who level up through traditional XP gains and can have their stat increases directly controlled every time you level up. Different types of Karma have different values depending on the Astrals you're purifying or leveling up. Some Astrals get more out of evil or good Karma, and the other types of Karma can still be used on them, but at a lesser value. When an Astral reaches a certain level, they get capped out and will need to be evolved. Evolving Astrals requires special items, however they're not usually in short supply. Evolving your Astrals causes them to change form, much like in Pokemon, but some transformations are definitely lazier than others, with some taking on entirely new forms, and others just getting a color swap or an added accessory. One of the things I think that led to this game being way too easy is that the general Astral is rather powerful and useful on their own, and as such it never feels encouraged to experiment with other Astrals. This allows you to dump all of your Karma into just 3 units and get them super powerful, rather than spreading it out among many different creatures. The best reason to maybe use another Astral is to see what moves you can unlock with them, as moves can be transferred and swapped from one Astral to another, making them absolute forces to be reckoned with. But this is something I've never done more than once, and would have only served to break the difficulty even further. In my entire playthrough, I maybe messed around with 8 or so different Astrals, but once I found 3 that worked well enough together, with an additional Astral in reserve to heal between battles without using my main party's MP, I never looked at the rest of them and I never felt the need to. Once in battle, you have the regular set of commands: attack, skills which use MP, weight, run, items, etc. Aggro also plays a small role here under the name of hostility. This eyeball icon on your character shows how much the enemy's attention is drawn to them and how likely they are to be attacked by said enemies. You can control and alter hostility in a number of ways, the most common of which being items. But given the game's lacking difficulty, this is one of many mechanics you can easily refuse to acknowledge and never really feel much effect from. We also have an auto battle, which reselects all of your last selected moves, or if you hadn't taken a turn yet in that fight, it will just spam normal attack instead. I used this for most of my battles, bosses included. The turn order is a little odd where you select all of your party's moves one after the other, and then watch them play out while enemies sometimes attack in the middle of them all. This doesn't leave that much room for organic evolving strategy, but strategy is often not required. Hayato is about the only unique unit where he has no skills and no MP, but instead he has the Gangor. As you adventure, the Gangor gets new abilities, new types of elemental attacks that might strike a different amount of times and for a higher or lower percentage of damage. The way the Gangor deals damage is unique to anything else. The shot that you use is strengthened by the types of astrals you have in your party, and will render your astrals unusable for the turn that you're taking your shot. It is also strengthened or weakened by the type of enemy you're attacking. It gets strengthened further by charging this meter up here through combat, and if this meter is nearly empty, you're going to do basically no damage at all. If you don't use your Gangor in time and you overcharge this meter, it essentially shorts out, resetting to 0, and you'll be unable to charge the meter for a short period. The Gangor's biggest weakness is unfortunately that it can only target one enemy at a time, no matter the shot. And while the Gangor appears really powerful at first, as your party levels up, a Gangor at full power unfortunately ends up doing less damage than if you just attacked with your individual party members. Since the Gangor ties up 4 of your 5 party members, it's pretty pointless to use unless there's an enemy you really want in your party, like D-Hole here, who really just has the best name for his design. The thing is, the more astrals you collect, the more you crowd your inventory, and the menus for sorting through these guys are just atrocious. I don't know most of my monsters by name, so these lists do nothing for me. A picture, at the very least, would be nice. When your inventory is overcrowded, you can actually pay a guy to take your astrals off your hands in exchange for karma. Thing is, this is a little bit pricey and it's a very time-consuming process. So time-consuming in fact that after going broke doing it once, I vowed to just deal with the crowded inventory and save my money. I also largely stopped catching new monsters. Quality of life like this is bad throughout most of the game. While exploring dungeons, you get relics of weapons and armor that need to be appraised before use. Of course, this can only be done one at a time. While selling items, you can only sell one item type at a time, but at least you can sell them in entire stacks. There's special items that you get that using will just add more karma to your pool, much like gaining souls from items in Dark Souls, but just like Dark Souls at launch, you can only use one of them at a time. I just don't get this. If I can sell and buy items in a stack, why can't I use consumables like this one in a stack? Why can't I sell my astrals in a stack? Why do I have to watch a cutscene every time I just want to get these dumbasses out of my inventory? Most dungeon crawlers, I feel, have some system in place that basically forces you out of the dungeon before you really want to leave, only to re-enter and retread old territory. The Lost Child actually attempted to implement more things that would interrupt your exploring like this, but they didn't really have much effect. In most other dungeon crawlers, more often than not, they force you out of the dungeons by giving you really small inventory capacity, something the Lost Child thankfully does not suffer from, granting you 99 item slots, with some items being stackable and some other items curiously not. The Lost Child's biggest attempt to force you out of dungeons comes by the way of the Ether Battery. Anytime an astral is moved from your reserves to your main party, it'll consume 1 notch in your Ether Battery. It seems to me that they expected your astrals to be dying frequently, and for you to be putting a lot of new ones in your party as you adventure. However, as we already discussed, this is not the case. At no point in the game did this battery interfere with my adventure. In fact, I don't think I've seen it drop below 1/3 empty. On this occasion, I'll praise the Lost Child for this mechanic having no real effect on regular difficulty, as more tedium in adventuring was not something this game needed. I stated earlier that battles aren't tedious because they're just so damn easy, but the puzzles are another matter. Often needlessly abstruse, puzzles span entire floors, are told through riddles, and at the worst of time become systems systems of trial and error. This trial and error is especially evident in one puzzle in the final dungeon, where you are told that you can't face east or you'll be teleported back to the start of the puzzle. The catch here is that you need to make your way through a room with invisible tiles on the floor that will turn your character in random directions. There's no way to tell what direction you'll be turned in, nor which tile will do it until you hit said tile, at which point it's already too late to account for, and you're back to the start. Other puzzles are just kind of boring. This large sewer dungeon just has you going around turning valves, redirecting water to fill and empty rooms so that you can progress. Getting the right combination of turned valves and traveling from one corner to the next over and over again can get rather agitating. But then, it's a rare case when the water temple is actually good. I will give the game credit for its system of shortcuts, however. After completing a puzzle, you'll often unlock a door that will lead you back to the previous floor, making it so that when you do have to leave a dungeon, traveling back to where you left off can be done in a fraction of the usual time. Sadly, as The Lost Child closes in on its climax and conclusion, all of its issues become exacerbated. Chapter 8, the game's final chapter, shows this with glaring evidence, as its dungeon continues for several floors longer than necessary, each floor with a different and rather unoriginal and boring, sprawling puzzle, extending this single chapter to the point that it ultimately ends up occupying about 1/4 of this game's total 40-hour runtime. Given the game ends with something you can complete with an auto battle, it's pretty safe to say that this just ends with an overall wet fart. Though if you still hadn't had enough by that point, the game's post-game tasks you with completing a 100-floor dungeon with all the downfalls of Chapter 8. Needless to say, I didn't quite enjoy this game enough to entertain the idea. As you can probably tell, and like I said in the beginning, this is a pretty darn middle-of-the-road game. So far, it would be hard to actually call it fully bad. I did still find myself wanting to uncover the rest of the story, and I did find myself wanting to see what the next puzzle was, thinking that this game had everything it needed to be good. Yet it just kind of kept letting me down. A failure to reach its potential. But there was something about playing this game that felt like there was like this tasty carrot kind of being dangled in front of us, and you're constantly, chasing after it, trying to get it. But at the end, when you do get it, it just doesn't really taste as good as you were hoping it would. So it kind of all ends up not really being fully worth it. Like, chasing the carrot was kind of fun a little bit on its own, but only because you believed there was going to be a promise at the end. So when there wasn't really much of one, it just really makes it hard to actually fully recommend this game. But let's move on from here and look at the last aspect here, the technicals. Now, to give credit to the game again, aside from one crash that I blame more on the Switch than the game itself, I found it actually ran rather well, pretty consistent overall. But then, it's just a dungeon crawler, there's not much cause for stability issue here, and most stability issues that a game like this could have wouldn't be too crippling. In terms of sound, nothing really stands out in a good way. Some sound effects on the menus are a little shrill, overly compressed, and way too loud. Even turning down the sound effects and music tracks made it hard to make some of these sounds feel less grating. Music throughout the entire game is all okay. Nothing great, but again, nothing bad either. Voiceovers, while also not great, I think are good enough and probably the most standout part of the sound in general. It's worth noting as well that both English and Japanese are supported.
It's detecting a layer. I wonder if Sarutani has some sort of weird antenna. It's going to take a while to search, so let's do some interviews while we wait.
Jeez, you sure brought a rare item, though I don't know how it got in your hands.
Every story you bring in lacks a sense of realism. I told you before, didn't I? The occult always needs some basis in reality.
In terms of the art, the 2D environments look pretty nice, though the same can't be said for the dungeons themselves, being a rather stock, budget-looking, and generic set of affairs. The character illustrations is what really stands out, and probably stand out as one of the game's absolute strongest suits, looking very akin to some 90s hand-drawn anime and manga. But there is some really obvious differences in quality between the A art and the B art. Juxtapose, the B cast monsters and characters look way worse. In fact, it's not even that the artistry or design is worse, they full on appear to be lower resolution, as if they were drawn on a restaurant napkin which somebody took a picture of with an early 2000s flip phone, compressed it and emailed it to themselves, then used Photoshop to cut the character out. It's jarring to say the least. There are a few animated cutscenes and I'd say those are done really well as well, even though they try to keep the animation in these cutscenes to a minimum. Some of the control mapping for opening and closing menus and maps can take a little getting used to, but it's not really worthy of complaint. In terms of technicals overall, the game ranges from average to okay, outside of the one caveat of the really bad B art. But that about brings us to an end here. This is an easy game to pass on, but not really a bad one to play it if you have it either. Nothing is outright broken, but many mechanics don't have their desired effect on standard difficulty. The puzzles, while offering a needed degree of variety in dungeons, kind of just shift your source of tedium, which I'll grant is better than feeling tedium over the exact same thing from start to finish. The balance is severely lacking where the game comes off far too easy, and the quality of life is pretty darn low. Most characters are lacking in one note, hardly seeming to even carry a real motivation, and the story kind of just happens and then treads water for a very long time. It saves itself a little bit by the end, but there's just a lot of floundering along the way. Simply because The Lost Child is so easy to move through and keep progressing to the next area, it saves itself from being a bad game, and it helps it feel like the adventure is paced better than the story. But even then, that aspect isn't exactly consistent. Play it if you're curious and already owned it, but don't expect much and don't run out to get it if you don't have it already. Unfortunately, The Lost Child kind of loses its potential and its plot pretty early on in the game, and it never exactly recovers it either. I doubt very many people are going to find a lot of value in this game, but it is exceptionally okay. And that's all I'm really gonna say on The Lost Child, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys like this video or found it useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. The links to all my socials are in the description below, and as always, folks, thanks for watching.